One of the most unique theme parks I've visited was the Holy Land experience in Orlando, Florida. One of the parks I get asked about a lot is the Holy Land experience in Orlando. Yes, I have actually been to it. I mean, after all, I am a pastor. Why are you so surprised? It is definitely a unique park in the realm of theme parks. There's no rides at it, so you're not going to go and be able to hop on a roller coaster or a log flume or anything at all like that. And it definitely falls into a unique niche that a lot of people kind of wonder, what is it really? If I can, I'll attempt to explain what the Holy Land experience is and what it isn't, and give you a little look inside. Now, the last time I was there was about 10 years ago, and it has changed some since that time. So be aware, the information in this isn't totally up to date, but most of what I'm going to show you is still very true for it. The Holy Land experience opened up as a privately owned park, and then several years later, as it was struggling a bit, TBN, a Christian broadcasting network, bought the park and took it over. And I have some interesting feelings about that, but I won't go into that. It generally kept the park the same. When you walk through the entrance, one of the very first things that you are greeted with is a scale model of what the temple would have looked like in Jerusalem back around the time that Jesus was alive. This is where the Jewish people worship God, and the whole idea of the park is to try to essentially take you back 2,000 years to feel like you were walking around an area and experience what it was like when Jesus was alive. There's no rides, as I said, so that you don't have anything super thrilling in that way. But what you do have is a lot of reenactments, a lot of models, and a lot of ways that they've tried to take some of that and bring it to life. You will have shows that will depict the wedding at Cana, Jesus' death and resurrection. You have a whole show that actually takes you inside the temple and shows you what it would have been like to be a priest, to go through the different ritual ceremonies, explaining what the outfit is. So if you're interested in biblical history in that regard, those can be absolutely fascinating. And if you're not, it's probably totally boring. On the stage of the temple itself, out in front, they usually do a number of musical shows and other productions. We got to see a Christmas show there, and we got to see another big production where they were acting out different musicals and things. That's a lot of fun, and it can be very entertaining. And there are a lot of people that would come in just for that evening show because it was kind of the spectacular show for the park. During the daytime, you have all the other shows that would go on. You also had a couple of other attractions that were definitely on the unique side. One of them was, if I remember right, it's the largest model outside of Israel of the city of Jerusalem. And it is this big, huge model where you can look down and you can kind of see what Jerusalem would have been like 2,000 years ago. In fact, the closest I've seen to this was actually the larger one I saw at the Museum of Israel in Jerusalem itself. And it's a really neat way to be able to look down and see where things were, how the city was laid out, how the things relate to each other. So if you are interested in the biblical story, it helps make it come to life and understandable, as opposed to just reading a story in a page. You can see how things laid out. That was really neat. And that was actually located in a place where they would have somebody come and talk you through the whole model. But if you went to another side of this building, there was actually another auditorium where, again, they would do some more shows, oftentimes musical entertainment. And then there was also a big, large store there. And the content of that store would change based on who owned it. There could be some great historical references there, and there could be some other interesting things. But for me, probably my favorite part of the Holy Land experience was actually the Scriptorium. This was a place where it was like a museum with all sorts of old Bibles, old scriptures, some portions of the Dead Sea Scrolls. One of the Bibles that was absolutely fascinating was an old Bible from the time that English translations were illegal, and apparently whoever owned this Bible was arrested and taken away in England. It's an English translation, but there's bloodstains on the pages. And then the question becomes, did those come from the person who owned the Bible and when they were arrested, or what happened? It's an interesting story. There's all sorts of different artifacts that take you from back before we had the New Testament to Old Testament times, cuneiform tablets, and all sorts of stuff that lets you see the history of the biblical scriptures. It's a fascinating museum. They don't allow you to take pictures in it. I wish they did, but I completely understand why they don't. But that was one place I could spend a lot of time. My only regret with it at the time was it was a tour kind of walkthrough timed, and so you couldn't just take your time. You did kind of have a pace that you were supposed to set, but that was just amazing. And again, the gift shop at the end of that had a lot of wonderful historical references and some great books that way. But most of the park was centered around the temple and the shows that went on there. They did have other gift shops that would sell a variety of different things, some from Israel, some promoting the TV station, and then a number of other things as well that would fit in with the theme of the park. There were a few restaurants and eateries, 3 or 4, so you could get food there while you were there. And depending upon what you were doing, if you were enjoying it and you liked watching all the shows, you could easily spend a day there. And if you weren't into that, in which case you're not the target audience anyways, then it would probably be about a half day maybe to walk through. And that kind of brings me to who the park is aimed at. The park itself is aimed at believing Christians. That is their target audience. It's not a place that if you are not a Christian, you're probably going to find really interesting. And if you are a Christian, then you may, depending upon how much you really want to know about the scriptures and the stories in them, and make it come to life. Unfortunately, I found some that really don't want to know that. So you have to keep in mind who the park is aimed at. If you're not one of the target audience, please don't be surprised if you were going in and being bored, because you're not who it's designed for. But if you are the audience, you're probably going to find it fascinating. It's neat to see the stories come to life. It's really neat to see the history behind it. And for a history major like me, and what you can't see is all the history books that I have, I absolutely loved that part of it. I didn't like some of the interpretation stuff that came in when TBN bought it. And again, I don't want to get too much into that, but there's some things there that, But the historical side of it, let me see what the temple looked like. Let me see how the holy place looked like and how the priests would minister and talk about that, explain what it is and why it is and how they did it. I love the story of the old scriptures, the model of Jerusalem. When you're taking the historical and using it to bring the Bible alive, that was cool. That was wonderful. And so that part I like. So that kind of gives you a little bit of an overview of what the Holy Land experience is like. 10 years ago, it was a fun park. And again, you could see more and more of the TV studio influence starting to come in, and it was changing the character of it a little bit. I don't know exactly what it is like today. I know one of the discussions at the time was actually opening up an actual TV studio there, and I have no idea if that's happened and how it has affected the park itself. So in those kinds of things, I'm not familiar totally with the Holy Land experience of today. But at the time, for a person who couldn't go to Israel and didn't ever expect to, it was a great way to kind of sample it without being able to do it. I have to admit, when I actually got to go to the real Jerusalem, there were parts of it that were really neat to be able to say, you know what? I can actually think back a little bit to the Holy Land experience and remember this. And so that was very cool about it. So have you been to the Holy Land experience? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Did you just think it was weird? I would love to hear your stories as well. Please don't hesitate to share them below. Have you been to other parks that were just different? Don't forget to share those as well. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks so much for liking, sharing, and subscribing. God bless. So if you're interested